Thank you all. My name is Michael Allen, and today I'm talking about the Via Media. The Via Media is a Latin phrase. In English, it means middle way, and it is a concept about navigating a way forward through controversial or extreme polarizing debates. Now, the Via Media is not about half measures. It does not mean lukewarm or apathetic. Instead, taking the middle way calls us to be inclusive rather than exclusive, unifying rather than divisive, and moderate rather than extreme. Above all, the Via Media seeks to find a way to move forward as a community rather than being captivated by potentially distracting and destructive division. The concept of Via Media the concept of moderation dates back thousands of years to the Greek philosophers. But the idea of Via Media that we would find familiar as Methodists dates back to the English Reformation of the 1500s. So it is a relatively old idea, but the idea of Via Media continues to have relevance throughout history and to this day for addressing times of turbulence and polarization. Perhaps this is because it was first employed in response to a time of great turbulence and polarization that we know of as the Reformation. Now, much has been said and written about the Protestant Reformation and Martin Luther, as well as the English Reformation and Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth. I'm only going to discuss the Reformation here in the way that it informs the concept of the Via Media, which in this case was the middle way between Lutheranism, Calvinism, and Roman Catholicism. Now, the Via Media, in this case, became the Anglican Church, or the Church of England, which we know today in America as the Episcopal Church. Now, hundreds of years after this Reformation, and yet hundreds of years still before today, an Anglican priest named John Wesley would chart a middle way that became Methodism. But we'll get to that later. First, let's talk about the state of the church in England to talk about the Via Media. About 500 years ago, in 1533, a lot of things were happening. It's a lot of turbulence, a lot of upheaval. We start, for centuries up until that point, the Roman Catholic Church was the only church and the only source of theological direction. 18 years earlier, in Germany, Martin Luther had famously nailed his 95 Theses to the door at Wittenberg, leveling a number of serious criticisms of the Roman Catholic Church, and proposed instead a Protestant set of beliefs and practices that were distinct from the Roman Catholic Church that came before. Shortly thereafter, Huldrych Zwingli in Switzerland and many others would also propose a separate set of beliefs that would come to be known as Calvinism. Now, also of note, around this time in England, William Tyndale's New Testament, the first mass-produced Bible in English, became available. Now, this new Bible included an epilogue explaining the Protestant theology of Martin Luther, so that everyday English person who was able to read and getting access to this Bible would also learn the tenets of Protestantism. Now, the reason I picked the date 1533 was that was the year that King Henry VIII had his marriage to Catherine of Aragon annulled, remarried her maid Anne Boleyn, and that led to the excommunication by the Pope and a huge rift with the powerful Roman Catholic Church. So what was England to do? They were separated from the Roman Catholic Church. There was a Protestant Reformation going on. There was a Calvinist Reformation going on. There was a new Bible available. There was a period of great turbulence. Should the church decide to keep the traditional beliefs of the Roman Catholics and try to heal the rift that Henry VIII's marriage had caused? Or should they have embraced the progressive ideas of Protestantism that were gaining support throughout the country? Or should they instead choose the Reformed ideas of Calvinism that were quickly developing a devoted following? The country was becoming polarized, and it seemed that any choice that was made would encounter powerful opposition, no matter what it was. What should they do? Think for a second. If you were the church in England in that time, what course would you chart? What would you do? Well, as we know, they chose none of the above. They chose a via media. Generally speaking, they embraced the language of the Protestants. However, they kept many of the practices of the Roman Catholic Church. And they created an opening for Calvinist reformers to be a part of the new Church of England. In all of this work, they championed what they called a middle way between religious extremes. And that was the birth of the Via Media. Out of no way, they made a way. Now, by embracing each of the aspects of these different sets of beliefs and they created a consistent set of beliefs that was distinct from the others. Now, this course that they chose was not without challenges, was not without setbacks, but it did create a foundation for how one could navigate seemingly impossible divisions. And ultimately, this Anglican church survived and thrived. And 200 years after the English Reformation, John Wesley would advocate for a different kind of via media regarding another polarizing issue. This issue was who gets to be part of God's people, also known as Calvinism versus Arminianism. Now, just like I had said with the English Reformation, much has been said about Calvinism and Arminianism. I, again, am only going to discuss it here in the way that it informs John Wesley's concept of the Via Media, and specifically how this controversy gave John Wesley the opening, the opportunity to apply a different way forward, a different version of the middle way than the English Reformation that I just mentioned. Now, Via Media during the English Reformation between Protestantism and Catholicism was a distinct belief from both of those that became Anglicanism. Wesley's approach was, and the Methodist Church today still is, squarely in the Arminian camp theologically. So he, between the two ways, didn't pick something entirely out of left field. What he did was how he preached and how he discussed his version of the Via Media in his theology. First, he repeatedly invited Calvinists to join the movement. Second, he used the controversy as a way to preach his beliefs as a starting point for him to discuss the methods that would become Methodism. And ultimately, he used the controversy to develop the theologies that would become the hallmarks of the Methodist faith. If you look at the controversy around predestination, you can see how these concepts of prevenient, justifying, and sanctifying grace work out. You can see how the idea of adding experience to the Anglican three-legged stool of tradition, scripture, and reason work out. He was engaged in the discussion and used it to make his theology and the theology of the Methodist movement improved because of this discussion. Now, Wesley came to allow a lot of diversity of thought on subjects that were considered non-essential. He had a famous quote where he said, "Not that your mind be with my mind, but if your heart be with my heart, then give me your hand." Ultimately, religion was something that was practiced of the heart. In Aldersgate, when he had his heart strangely warmed, he realized this was not an esoteric, antiseptic debate of ideas. This was real life, real people, real issues. And he approached it that way. Another one of his famous quotes, which comes out of this, is his three statements: in essentials, unity; in non-essentials, diversity; in all things, charity. That was Wesley's Via Media. We can have disagreements, but his approach of charity, understanding, love, humility, rather than condemnation and judgment, was something that set him apart from his contemporaries of the day and sets the Methodist movement apart to this day. This is the Via Media. Now, ultimately, some of those would-be Methodists would leave the movement over this controversy. However, many more were won over to the movement by the concepts of grace, and a grace that is open to all, to everyone, and a movement that rose above, that could and did rise above a debate that could have shattered the Methodist movement, that caused much heartache for hundreds of years. The Methodist movement was able to rise above it and use it to make a greater point. So in times of polarization, in times of controversy, this third way, this middle way, this Via Media is a way to move forward. Now, today, many things have changed since John Wesley's time. But human nature has not. People still, to this day, love to fight about all sorts of things. But Jesus did not say to the world that the world will know that you are my disciples by how you fight. They will know that we are his disciples by our love. The world needs Jesus. The harvest is plentiful. The laborers are few. And any minute that the church spends fighting amongst ourselves is a minute lost to the work God calls us to do. Therefore, it is an essential lesson of our faith to be open to God's call and to be open to a middle way that can move us forward to something better. I pray that we can continue to hold a Via Media as we follow God's call as a church community and in our own lives. Thank you.